Country continues to pay tribute to the late King Goodwill's KaBhekuzulu. I'm joined now by the KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sihle Zikalala to talk to us about his legacy and contribution to KwaZulu-Natal and South Africa at large. Premier, good evening and thank you very much for your time tonight. Before we get into the broader conversation, let's just address this issue that has been raised by our reporter down on the ground, looking at the numbers of those who gathered today to come and pay their respects, clearly above the regulated number. Are you at all concerned that this event will turn to being a super spreader event?
We are concerned, and that's why we are trying our best, working with the national government to ensure that we avoid overcrowding and ensure that people are encouraged to mourn, but to mourn in respective areas and especially at their homes. We have established some mechanisms. We have worked with local municipalities to have public viewing areas which will be connected direct to the proceedings that will be happening at the Royal House. We have also established connections in each of the palaces within the 6 palaces that are in place. And we're trying to mitigate the situation.
So what you're saying is tomorrow and probably as the week progresses, we might be seeing more presence of crowd control, which would be directing people to these various viewing spots that you're mentioning?
Tomorrow we hope we will succeed to direct people to these public viewing areas. We must, however, thank that even now, we've worked together with the national government, especially Minister Zweli Mkhize, Minister Cele, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to ensure that we prepare sufficiently. Even for today, we're able to try and give them a mask and all of that. Well, we have noticed that some of them are not wearing those masks. That is concerning us, but we will do all we can to ensure that we adhere to the COVID-19 regulations and protocols.
Yeah, it is quite key also to impress it upon all, I suppose, Premier, that the virus at this particular point, what we know is that wherever there is movement, then it begins to spread. And the real danger here is us going to a third wave much sooner than we are expecting to get there.
Really, that is a problem we're facing. It's a serious danger, and we should avoid hitting the third wave early than expected. But even when we get into that period, we should ensure that we are not severely affected.
Now, Premier, of course, you have declared a week of mourning, but also in your initial address, you said the passing of the king will have a devastating impact on the province culturally, but also as far as economic development is concerned. The king saw himself, I saw in one of the interviews he did about 4 years ago with Al Jazeera, as a king for all in the province, irrespective of the race, religion, or even their political affiliation. Talk to us about the role that the king played as a custodian of the Zulu traditions and customs. Yes, we know it was ceremonial in nature, it was a spiritual role, it was a traditional role, but what is it in real terms did the king do?
Well, King Zwelithini, as a king of the Zulus, occupied the throne, but he also reached out. So he managed to inculcate the customs and the traditions amongst the Zulus. But he also managed to use that as a tool to inspire others, especially for social cohesion and stability. But when we focus on the issue of the culture and traditions, I think there are a number of things that he brought and he initiated. Among those, it's the Ritz dance, Umkhosi Womhlanga, and among those is the sessions that we used to have with young boys, especially in December period. And those are issues those are key interventions that he brought to ensure that we become more more orientated in a way that use the traditions and customs, but progressively, and ensure that that does not hinder the progress of our nation, especially in the development that is taking place in the world.
Certainly broad acceptance in your government, in the province, in particular the role of the king, even maybe by political parties, one would say, to the extent that he was a key player, especially whenever the legislature would open and he would address that. Did that in any way alienate the other groupings to feel as if one cultural identity was being elevated above others in the province?
Not at all. It didn't alienate anyone, but instead it brought every sectors and all groupings that are in the province together. In fact, it was a glue that brought people together. He would even in his palace convene ceremonies to celebrate occasions and historical milestones of other racial groups. I can confirm that for a number of years, His Majesty would celebrate Diwali, which is not a Zulu tradition per se, but he would also interact with Chinese. He will interact with English-speaking people, especially those who come from Britain, in relation to the history and the legacy of the birth of Isandlwana. So it was a glue that brought people together and ensured social cohesion.
Yeah. It was very interesting to note the UDM actually noting his environmental awareness and the kind of role he played in promoting, for example, the planting and the cultivating of your own produce, but also during the redone ceremony, the planting of trees.
That was quite important, and it is something that we must sustain going forward, because natural preservation is quite important. He was always conscious about preserving nature. The indigenous trees, which are used by many traditional healers, but also indigenous knowledge, which need to be promoted. So planting of trees for him was part of that understanding. And that's why we will say he will use the traditional method to fit in the dynamics, in the current dynamics of preserving nature and fighting the climate change that is affecting us.
Yeah. He became an ally, I suppose, for government as well to some extent in the fight against xenophobia. I remember in 2015 he called Imbizo, where he says, you must now go and protect all foreign nationals in the province. And that work, how successful was it? And did the people actually heed the call of His Majesty?
Indeed, people heed they did listen and embrace his call, because he didn't only made a statement, but he also interacted with structures from traditional leadership, ensured that structures of traditional leaders goes down to ensure that they engage with communities. And they work with us as government to identify those areas that were affected by the violence against the people of foreign nationals. And we were able to deal with that upfront. And I think even the commission, the Human Rights Commission, which was investigating the whole issues, all issues that started that xenophobic violence, exonerated him, because some were trying to accuse him that he was responsible of starting that violence. And we are grateful of his role he has played in reaching out to African countries, whether you will talk of Zambia, you will talk of Malawi and others, ensure that Africanism is preached and encouraged.
What does this mean then for the relationship going forward with the royal family, Premier, when I'm talking here on behalf of the KZN government and the royal family? I mean, you have received a lot of criticism of the money that you spend in the royal household. I mean, now raising it up to 71 million, and you have also indicated that the Royal House Trust will now work closely with COGTA to particularly look at revenue streams for the Royal House. How far is that work gone?
The work is continuing. We are restructuring and working with the Royal House Trust, and we would want to see the trust beginning to work in a manner that is effective and be able to fundraise and sustain the royal household. There are things that will obviously have to be done by government, and as government will have to carry on with that. We are not just paying the royal family, but it is about services that are coordinated by the royal house and the king in particular. And it's not a question of paying him as an individual, but it is to support those activities. When you talk about the wreath dance, you need to ensure that there is a transport, there is catering and everything that will ensure that the event is successful. And that is allocation caters for things like that.
Now, Premier, we know the President has declared a special Category 1 funeral. What does this mean? Because the interment is happening tonight, so tomorrow it will be more of a memorial service. What will then, how will the military honors be incorporated in all that?
All of that is done, and the President declared the funeral as part of Category 1 to salute and honor the role played by His Majesty. And that is not done only to King Zwelithini. We have seen it before. And we must say that how it will be done, the flag will be there, it will be given to the Royal House, and those symbolic recognition of the role played by the King will still be observed even tomorrow.
Premier, I appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us. That was the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala.